My name is Emily Gordon. I'm the Director of Education and Associate Curator here at the Desert Caballeros Western Museum. I am delighted to see all of you here for our fabulous lecture today with Dr.Tricia Loscher. But before we get started, I would like to bring up Ms. Tarry to talk to you about some membership and development opportunities.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everybody. How are we doing on this fine Friday? Good response. Thank you all for coming out to this lecture. I, for one, am very excited about it. Listen to Tricia. But yes, so if you all are not members yet, by a raise of hands, who is members here at the museum? Congratulations! You guys are the Cool Club today. To those of you who are not members yet, you can get in the Cool Club. All of those who came in today that are members got in for free. So you get into all of our lectures for free all year long. You get special discounts on our ticket pricing to all of our events. And you also get to come to our exhibitions first, the night before it opens. So you get an exclusive look at our exhibitions before the public gets to see it. So there's lots of great perks. And you also get 10% off in our museum gift shops. For those of you that wear turquoise jewelry, we have lots of turquoise in those stores, and you get 10% off. And we don't have tax because we're nonprofit, so you save a lot of money. So anyway, that's my pitch to you. You should all become members. It's a great club to be a part of, and I hope you enjoy our lecture today. Oh, I'm getting yelled at in the back room by Miss Margaret Nyberg. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention volunteer opportunities. So we thrive on our volunteers here at the museum, and before I was development coordinator, I headed the volunteers here at the museum. So I should have known to plug that, but we can always use volunteers. We are very sparse nowadays, to be completely honest, and we can use all the help we can get. Our minimum is very low. We only require 40 hours per year. So that's 1 3.5-hour shift a month. So anything helps. We'll take all we can get. So if you are interested in being a volunteer or being a member, come see me in the front of the Learning Center after this lecture is over. Thank you.
I would like to touch on that as well. We have multiple generations of visitor services managers, volunteer coordinators. And I would just like to say, if you are new to town, this is one of the best ways you can get involved in the community, learn about what Wickenburg has to offer, learn about the history of the area, and make fabulous friendships that'll last a lifetime. So, that's my sales pitch for that. So now, moving on to the highlight of our day, we have Dr.Tricia Loscher here, who is our Chief Curator, and Dita and John Daub, Curator of Western Women Art. Correct? Is that the right title?
Very good.
All right, good. It's a wonderful title, and we are so delighted that we have wonderful supporters of our museum, like the Daubs, that help us acquire wonderful artwork from Western women artists. But today, we have Dr. Loscher here to talk about the artist Lone Wolf, who has paintings featured in that display case right over here. And if I'm not mistaken, you also wrote your dissertation on Lone Wolf.
I did.
Well, wonderful. So, come on up here. Without further ado, Dr. Tricia Loscher.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you all this beautiful Friday morning, not Wednesday, Friday morning in Wickenburg. There we go. Oh, my goodness. Well, let's see. I'm make sure I have this. There we go. Okay, so I did write my dissertation on Lone Wolf for my University of Arizona, my doctorate degree, and I did an exhibition on him. It was the first retrospective that's ever been done, and he's just an absolutely fascinating artist. When I came to Wickenburg in January of this year, we were very fortunate to be the recipients of the 3 paintings that Emily pointed out in the case to my left over here. And those are the earliest known lone wolves. They're dated 1911, and they're signed Rising Wolf, and instead of his name, which he signed Lone Wolf on many of his works, so with a little wolf's head. And There's kind of a mystery why he signed Rising Wolf, but they have been authenticated by Paul Dyke, who was his adopted son. And also the Hubble Museum up in Ganado, the trading post, they have some really early Rising Wolf paintings too that we are pretty much sure that those are lone wolves as well. So without further ado here, I'll get started. He's a very fascinating person and character of the American West. What I love to do as a curator and researcher is to really look at the artists who have been marginalized and have been little studied in the art world, and that's one of the reasons I focused on Lone Wolf. He's just really an artist that has been long forgotten, and eventually I hope to make my dissertation into a book. But his Anglo name was Hart Merriam Schultz. His life dates were circa 1882 to 83. You read different versions in the research, to 1970. And this is Lone Wolf with his father, James Willard Schultz, who is a very prolific writer and very well known in his own right. And this is Lone Wolf as he's sculpting. And he was a painter, an illustrator, and an incredible sculptor. And when I did the retrospective of his work, his sculpture actually really stood out. It's so very strong, and I had many people say that they had no idea what an incredible sculptor he was in bronze work as well. He worked in Arizona and Montana, and so it's really neat to watch that bridge between the two states that he traversed throughout his history. And he also bridged between the culture of his mother's Blackfeet people and the Euro-American culture of his father, James Willard Schultz. And the scope of what Lone Wolf experienced and the transformations that occurred during his lifetime, spanning the passing of the wild buffalo herds, and he loved to paint buffalo hunt scenes, to the first man on the moon is just tremendous, and it's a really rich history. His art contains an art historical record of the expansion of Western American frontier, as well as the artist's unique experience as seen through his life and his artistic vision, and being of both worlds, the Blackfeet culture and then his father's world. It's very interesting to analyze his work. He gained recognition through his life, even though his work did not conform to what, as an art historian, the traditional, as I've seen, American Indian art movement, known as the Indian style or the boarding school style of painting that you often see accredited, that Dorothy Dunn, a teacher, taught to Native students at boarding schools. And this is an example of a recent donation to the museum of an early boarding school art, probably from the teens, early teens. It is signed Nat Puris, and it's Tesuque Pueblo. So he really broke out of that time period when this was the style of Native American painting through boarding school art, and he's known, really accredited with being the first artist to paint in a Western style. Often if you pick up like a biography on artists of the American West and he's listed, they compare him to a Russell or a Remington, which is very interesting. And he received great patronage during his lifetime, yet today, of course, as I'm saying now, he is virtually unknown. And I do believe one reason for his obscurity now as an artist is that he did not produce what was considered the traditional American Indian art. He aligned himself with the Western American art. As you see, this is one of his pieces here. And even though he painted romanticized images of cowboys and American Indians, many of his artworks reveal his cultural ties to his Blackfeet tribe. Seasonal migrations from Arizona to Montana attest to the importance Lone Wolf placed on maintaining his tribal identity and the connections to his land. And this is a very early painting. It was part of the Jim Bilac collection that went to the University of Oklahoma, to Norman and to the Fred Jones Museum. It's of a roundup, and Lone Wolf was a working cowboy as well, and this is It even says there's a roundup at the bottom, and this piece he actually signed. I have seen very few signed like this, Hart Merriam Schultz. His work embodies experiences that he drew upon from his multicultural heritage, and they reveal details about clothing and ceremonies that he understood as an American Indian. We can refer back to that piece. His work was considered interpretive, and this was summarized by the words of the art critic Vance Thompson, who wrote in 1917, this one, that's his father. His work is of a very big order because it is interpretive. His strength as an artist is in his uncompromising realism, in his sincere treatment of the human form, in his intricate knowledge of the life he paints. Add to this a wizardry of color, go back to that one. Add to this a wizardry of color which is significantly his own. And to art lovers and to painter folk, I want to say one thing. There is a new artist coming up the trail, and the name on him is Hart Merriam Schultz, but his pictures are signed with a wolf's head, and you'll see that in those paintings over here that he signed actually Rising Wolf. Lone Wolf's father, James Willard Schultz, life dates were 1859 to 1947, had gone west to New York during the 1870s. As a youth, he developed a passion for the outdoors and was fascinated by stories of Montana's wilderness. There's actually a James Willard Schultz Society, and there's been many, many books, just biographies written on Schultz himself. The older Schultz, he booked passage on a steamboat and traveled up the Missouri. In Fort Benton, Montana, he met a trader named Joseph Kipp, who hired him to run his trading post. And that is Hart Merriam Schultz, or Lone Wolf, with his father, James Willard Schultz. Lone Wolf was born in Montana on Birch Creek near Browning in 1882-1883. This photograph of Schultz and his son was taken inside of Kipp's trading post. Lone Wolf credited his grandfather, Yellow Wolf, as his mentor and inspiration for his artistic career. Yellow Wolf taught him the ways of the elders and told him stories. During an interview, Lone Wolf was asked why he wanted to be a painter, and he replied, quote, "When I was a boy, we were taught by our older people, so we tried to imitate them. We got our paints, we made of vegetal and mineral, and our brushes were made of bone. We modeled horses, and I never thought that someday I would take that up as a profession." And he also talks about using the clay from the riverbanks in Montana as a little child to model his horses and animals that he would create. His mother, Fine Shield woman, passed away in 1903. I have been unable to find a life date for her yet, but she was a member of the Blackfeet tribe. And Schultz's work, the elder Schultz, began working at Fort Conrad Trading Post, and by the age of 18, he had learned the Blackfeet language. The elder Schultz was adopted by the tribe and given the name Apakuni, which means far off white buffalo robe. He became the famous writer on American Indian culture, authoring more than 37 books. I think it's actually more in the 40 range, including an epic American classic of the Old West, My Life as an Indian, and Bird Women, which is a story about Sacagawea that actually Lone Wolf illustrated. And I find it very interesting. Lone Wolf illustrated very few of his father's books. Other famous Western artists did, but there was also, as I started to uncover and do interviews, a little bit of friction between Lone Wolf and his father throughout the years. In 1885, after the naturalist George Bird Grinnell read an article by James Schultz, he selected the author to guide him through the Loscher National Park. The trip resulted in Grinnell and Schultz lifelong crusade for the preservation of Montana's lakes, rivers, and mountains. And they actually named a lot of the mountain ranges and different peaks and stuff in Loscher National Park. Lone Wolf's family lived on the Blackfeet Reservation, and this is where his father worked as a guide for wealthy sportsmen from the East and the West. Another painting by Lone Wolf. This is a photo I found of the Willow Creek Boarding School, 1898, west of Browning, Montana. And Lone Wolf did write some very interesting stories about attending the boarding school and his experience there. After his mother's death in 1903, James Schultz, the father, left Montana and settled in California, working as a literary critic for the Los Angeles Times. Lone Wolf, however, divided his time between Arizona and Montana, and he also worked as a wrangler at different ranches, and this is one of the ranches up there that he worked for. His contact with his father's friends and his business associates, such as George Bird Grinnell, C. Hart Merriam, for whom he was named, and Theodore Roosevelt, Owen Wister, General Hugh Scott, and Buffalo Bill Cody, provided him entree into a world of scientists, politicians, and notable Westerners. Lone Wolf knew artists such as Thomas Moran, and he worked with him up at the Grand Canyon, and Moran was a great and very much encouraged Lone Wolf in his art, as well as Charles Schrey-Vogel, who gave Lone Wolf his first set of paints, Olaf Seltzer and Frederick Remington, who visited him at his studio in Glacier National Park. And this is a photo from Glacier. All of this is like a story with another story. It's like going down a rabbit hole. It's incredibly rich. There's so many stories here. And this is also Lone Wolf. You can see second to the left there, and his father James Willard Schultz on the far left at Glacier National Park. And this is where Lone Wolf had his studio in the summer months. Charles Russell had befriended the elder Schultz during their range riding days, and later in life, Russell spent time with Lone Wolf and the tribal elders at Glacier National Park and elsewhere, hearing stories about native life that Russell ended up recording in his own paintings and sculptures. And some of this has been written about, and very little, but some has been written about, and goes on more recent books about Charles Russell. So there is a new artist coming up the trail, and here's a quote. His work is of a very big order because it is interpretive. This is a fun one. This is from the Arizona Historical Society. It's a wonderful, the pictures don't, of course, on the screen do these justice, but you can see the rabbit hopping off to the right, and the horse is being spooked by the rabbit. It's real faint, but he's down there on the right corner. His work is of a very big order because it is interpretive. His strength as an artist is in his uncompromising realism, in his sincere treatment of human form, in his intricate knowledge of the life he paints. Add to this a wizardry of color which is significantly owned. So this is all, again, this is Vance Thompson, who was a very big, he really did a lot of writing about Lone Wolf. There's also another world of Lone Wolf that I'm still trying to explore, and that's with James Youngdeer. So when he left Montana in 1903, he also spent time along with his father in California. And sometime around, a little bit later, around 1909, he went to work as an actor for James Youngdeer. And Youngdeer's life dates are 1876 to 1946. And he was of the Pathé film, located in California, fame, and was one of the first American Indian filmmakers and producers in Hollywood, making one-reel westerns during the first part of the silent film era. Youngdeer is credited for his positive portrayal of American Indian people in his films. Lone Wolf wrote about his involvement in the early film industry and his progression into making artwork. And he wrote, quote, James Youngdeer was the manager, director, and scenario writer. He wrote his story out on location, and the pictures there and then. After a day's work was done, everyone wanted to get a little tear on, and I quit the picture game and landed in Flagstaff. He was quite a character. When you read his actual writings and his letters, he had this wonderful sense of humor. It was just really fantastic. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to break for a quick drink of water. And That's a still from one of Young Deer's films, and I've done some research to try to hopefully find a film that has Lone Wolf in it, but I have not been successful yet. So he went to work for an outfit up in Flagstaff run by Fred Waltz, and I've done a lot of research on Fred Waltz when I was at the Heard Museum, and I was located at Canyon Diablo. And Lone Wolf worked there for nearly a year up in Canyon Diablo. You know, if you're going across from Flagstaff over to New Mexico, you go across a bridge that is the Canyon Diablo Bridge. So if you look just to your left, if you're heading toward Lake Gallup, there's actually the trading post, the remains of Fred Waltz's trading post is not too far from the road. That was one of them, at least, that he had, that Lone Wolf went up there and worked with Trader Fred Waltz. He worked with him for nearly a year and then quit that outfit, and that was the last time he said I handled stock. He also went on to the Grand Canyon. Another really fascinating chapter, and unfortunately this isn't the best photo, but thankfully we have this. This is where he started to draw paintings and really worked in watercolors quite a lot. He sold his first pictures to the Santa Fe Railway Company. He said he got $100 for one larger picture, but I sold more pictures at $5 and $10 than at $100. He seriously began producing art in 1909 while he was working in Arizona at the Grand Canyon. And then he said that the artist Thomas Moran, according to Lone Wolf, quote, took a liking to me, for he was a very kind and helpful man and had deep interest in anyone who was Indian. When he found out that I was Blackfeet from the north, he became very interested in what I was trying to do. I am sure that Grandfather Yellow Wolf would have been surprised that such a man as Thomas Moran would befriend his grandson and encourage him to make his way in art in the white man's world. So Lone Wolf followed Moran's advice, and for a short while he studied at the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League in LA. He described his experiences in Chicago with his cowboy friend Jim McMurdo, excuse me. And, I'm going ahead of myself here, but the instructor, he said, Lone Wolf said, now, fellows, draw from that cast. The cast was the head of a monk. We set to work with all these little shorthorns, meaning young students. He called them shorthorns because they're greenhorns, because they weren't very, accomplished yet. Around us, all these young horns would giggle around us. Jim and I were just sitting to try to make a good drawing. We lasted just 1 week or so. We were getting mighty homesick for the big open spaces of the American West. The year 1917 was a big turning point for his work. He set himself on a path toward self-discovery and was introduced, and I believe this was also through his father's contacts, to a man named August Heckscher, who became one of Lone Wolf's devoted patrons, and arranged for him to go to New York to hold an exhibition. And this is what you see here at Babcock Galleries, one of the exhibition brochures. He bought all of Lone Wolf's paintings from the show and introduced him to the owners of Babcock Galleries. Established in 1852, Babcock is the oldest gallery in the United States that has from inception focused on American art. Lone Wolf felt that he was finally being recognized as an artist, and because the gallery carried his work, the work of Frederick Remington and other famous Western painters, you can imagine how that really helped to elevate him. While in New York, he visited museums and studied under an Italian sculptor. Lone Wolf recalled that the artist was, quote, doing a 9-foot statue of an American Indian, and he had finished, and he said, come take a look at it. He said, what do you think of it? I said, the figure is fine, but your regalia is all wrong. I said, that pipe that man's got in his hand is a Chinese pipe. Indians did not have pipes like that. And I took my moccasins out and showed him those. He changed it and he used the pipe that I gave him for a model and the moccasins. So he got $30,000 for his sculpture, and he taught me free for helping him. It's just so interesting, all of this. We're very fortunate to have these personal accounts. And I do not know what sculpture that is, and I hope someday to find out and if it's still there. In 1917, Lone Wolf held his first one-man show in Los Angeles. And he was also written about that he is an artist with an authentic vision, sincerity, and a brush which is already capable of doing precisely the things he wants it to do. His work is his own, his method, his high palette, his swift, light brush work his own. And what he knows, he learned in the great silences of the desert, the plains, and the canyons of the Southwest. The following year, he was living in Hollywood and created a painting for an actor named Dustin Farnham. And his life dates are 1874 to 1929. Farnham was a singer, dancer, and an actor on the stage and in silent films. And he was in many of very famous westerns, including Cecil B. DeMille's The Squaw Man of 1914, Davy Crockett of 1916, and The Light of Western Stars, 1918, which I believe was filmed down by the border between Arizona and Mexico on a ranch down there. He was also spending time, Lone Wolf was, at Loscher Ranch with his collector and supporter of his artwork, Jack Kinney, who commented to Lone Wolf that the commissions from Farnham ought to help some in advertising. Those were Kinney's words. It is quite possible that Lone Wolf met Farnham during his stay during the winter of 1918 at Los Morris Ranch in the southern Arizona near the Mexico border. It was a location for the filming of Sherman's production, The Light of the Western Stars, and starring Dustin Farnham, and it was directed by Charles Swickard. And many wonderful letters about this exist between Lone Wolf and his patron Kinney, including these illustrated letters that I'm going to show you right now that are just gems. This is from Greer, where he had his studio cabin with his father. His father actually built this in Greer, Arizona. Still there today. You can visit it. It's the Butterfly Lodge Museum. This is to Mr. Kinney. Just wonderful, with his sketches. I love archival material. It's so rich, and what you can glean from these. This is a great one. December 22nd, 1921. Dear Kinney, don't mistake this for a Japanese ambassador, for this is yours truly. This is my Fifth Avenue parade dress, dog and all. Your good letter was received a few days ago. Was very glad to hear from you. Again. It's just... And this one too, written Park Avenue Hotel Stationery, New York, March 17, 1922. Dear friend Kinney, just got back from Central Park looking at all kinds of animals, but I found one squirrel sure cussed me out in the sign language. So I made a sketch of him and myself. I guess he wasn't into seeing a real Western dude. In a few days, I will have an exhibition of my pictures and we'll send you some of the write-ups I just got in the papers. He did that quite a lot. He would share those with Kinney. You can see his little Lone Wolf face down in the corner there that he signed his work with. Just wonderful. And he did have a poncho belt like that as well. Here's another great one. This was sent from Greer, 1923, to Mr. Kinney at Loscher Cattle Company, which apparently was a huge ranch. Kinney owned huge holdings across the Southwest and down into Mexico. And this is a portrait of Kinney. So he was in the late 20s and 30s. He was having a very productive time. In 1925, he exhibited in Tucson his paintings of American Indians and cowboys with desert and mountain backgrounds. And in the springtime, he would go to places like Chicago. The Chicago Herald-Examiner published a photograph of the artist making a painting on Michigan Avenue, and I just love this. He's wearing his full regalia and he's painting a skyscraper there. And look at the caption. I mean, all of this, you can really deconstruct. Uses no war paint. So it's a very complex but fascinating story here that we have. According to the newspapers, he was, quote, finding some of the best outdoor subjects his eyes and brush have ever encountered. Lone Wolf has also displayed his Grand Canyon painting. And this is in the Tucson Museum of Art's collection. And one art critic wrote about the painting, with the verve of a government mule, the artist has achieved enviable artistic heights with his portrayal of Arizona's canyon. Though the picture is comparatively an old one, it has never been displayed in the big galleries, and one wishes that it might be immediately, feeling that it, for once, is nature's greatest masterpiece, has been worthily reproduced. The painting hung in Jack Kinney's La Osa Ranch office and the old Santa Rita Hotel in Tucson. A writer for the Tucson Citizen wrote, who saw it, remarked, quote, many gaze from the hotel lobby through the glass partition in La Osa office and admire Lone Wolf's magnificent portrayal of the Grand Canyon. This has been acclaimed by some critics to be the truest characterization ever made of the varied colored canyon. His paintings were finding their way into the collections of Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Robert Colgate. Again, I think a lot of this was through his father's connections as well. And of course, the galleries that he was doing, showing in, like Babcock Gallery. August Heckscher purchased and donated this bronze, which is entitled Camouflage. This is it when it was sitting in my exhibition in the case. And this is Brook Green Gardens collection. They were very generous and loaned this. It's a beautiful little piece. Just gorgeous brown patina on it. The following year, he modeled the bronze Riding High. There we have that one. And the artist Paul Dyke wrote that the bronze was, quote, the greatest of his work. It embodies all of the romance and drama of the American West. And Paul lived up in Rimrock, Arizona, on a ranch up there, and I was fortunate before he passed to go up there several times and do interviews with him about Lone Wolf. During the 30s and the 40s, Lone Wolf continued to be at the height of his career. His paintings and bronzes were favorably received by art critics and the public. Part of his success can be attributed to his patron, Jack Kinney, and the announcements of his exhibitions in LA, New York, and Chicago revealed his activity as an artist exhibiting at the local and the national levels. These are some of his illustrations that he did for Indians of Yesterday by Marion Gridley, an educational children's book about American Indians. During the 1930s, he turned increasingly toward producing his bronze sculptures, which represent action-filled scenes that serve as a realistic, detailed documents of the American Indian and cowboy life. In 1931, he exhibited in LA and San Francisco. I'm just going to show you this. It's a little out of, this is 1922, but it's interesting. The papers were really writing a lot about him. And here, this is the Evening World 10-second movies. There he is, his photo. And down below, Broadway Indian, shock Lone Wolf, Blackfoot artist who prefers manners of his own, quote, quote, uncivilized, dignified people. And it's really funny when you read this, how he's commenting on, like, all of the makeup, because he's going to parties in New York, and he can't believe how, women are dancing, and it's just, quite a cultural shock for him, too. He wrote, quote, I had shows in both places, LA and San Francisco, and did well on the bronzes as I made a lot more since I left New York and then cast them in LA. However successful, end quote, the interwar years of the 1930s were very difficult financially. He remarked that while he was living in his studio cabin in Greer, that, quote, I did a lot of hunting as I know it is going to be a hard winter ahead of me. So I got plenty of wild meat and make some beef meat too and smoke it, end quote. During the 1950s and 60s, this is a painting that's in the Heard Museum's collection, Lone Wolf continued to paint what he referred to as our old Western country. The Donahue Publishing Company asked him to write a story about his life, which he never completed. He estimated that he had produced at least 500 paintings throughout his career and reflected on his life as an artist, quote, "At my old age now, I am just beginning to find out that when a man gets around about 70, he just begins to know something about art. When I first started doing it, I thought I knew all about it. You couldn't tell me anything about it. I realize now you have to work at it many, many years to really understand it," end quote. Lone Wolf's father, James Willard Schultz, came to, when first came to Arizona to finish his book, My Life as an Indian. That was about 1907. From 1906 to 1908, the elder Schultz lived and worked on the Tohono O'odham Reservation in Arizona, where he assisted archaeologist Jesse Walter Fuchs in the excavation of the Hohokam ruins in Casa Grande. In 1913, James Schultz's hunting lodge was built in Greer, Arizona, and that is there today, and I encourage you all to visit. It's just wonderful. According to James Willard Schultz, one of his father's biographer, Warren Hanna, if you want a great biography on the father, Warren Hanna's is very good. Quote, "Schultz had looked forward to the time when he could own a mountain retreat where there was an abundance of wildlife. The site selected by Schultz was a small open meadow beside the clear headwaters of the Little Colorado River. It was surrounded by a veritable garden of wildflowers, and there were countless butterflies everywhere. Schultz aptly named it Butterfly Lodge." James Willard Schultz gave Butterfly Lodge to his son Lone Wolf and his wife Naoma. On the walls of the cabin were displayed tomahawks, buffalo hides, American Indian rugs, and beaded clothing. Together, the father and son captured the spirit of the American West, fashioning their careers in words and paintings. They were two free spirits who found inspiration in Arizona as well as the high mountains of Montana. Through widespread support and preservation, the Butterfly Lodge Museum today pays homage to the remarkable artist. That's Lone Wolf. In 1970, Lone Wolf, also known as Rising Wolf, like our paintings in the case, and Hart Merriam Schultz, passed away in Tucson, Arizona, that's where he would spend a lot of his winters. There's a whole story down there too. I can't even, there's so much, so you're getting the highlights. His ashes were returned to Montana for burial by his wife and his adopted son and daughter, the artists Paul Dyke and Jean. He is buried in the grave with his uncle, Last Rider. 4 willow wands, crowned by eagle feathers, mark the grave. Naoma Schultz, and you can see her, she's standing on the left, gave eagle feathers to friends and relatives in remembrance and celebration of the artist's life. And then according to tribal tradition, and this is the photo from 1.5 years later, there was a giveaway feast of the Blackfeet held in his honor. A teepee housed a memorial exhibition of photographs and artwork, including the bronze sculpture Riding High, which is on display let's see, I think that's up at the Montana Historical Society. They have that piece. By the end of, I don't know for sure that it's on display, but they do have it. By the end of the day, nearly 1,000 people had seen his art and feasted on beef and buffalo meat. This is another photo. Oh, and in this photo of the artist Paul Dyke, who was his adopted son, is standing here to the right holding the hat. And he inherited many of Lone Wolf's personal effects after Lone Wolf's wife passed away several years later. Excuse me. Lone Wolf leaves behind an invaluable, some would say incomparable, historical and cultural record of an important period of the American West. Through his paintings, sketches, and sculptures, he faithfully, and I'd have to say his archival record, his letters, his, everything that he illustrated on paper. He recorded the Blackfeet Indians, life on the range, and the startling light of the Arizona desert and the grandeur of the vast landscapes. That's his little wolf head. He was born of two worlds, and though his hard-won achievements as an artist, both the Anglo and Native American cultures have been enriched through his hard-won achievements. His paintings and bronzes of cowboys and American Indian life live on as visual records of his cultural memory. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
What's the name of the artist who brought the children at the boarding school?
Dorothy Dunn, she was one of the, she was one instructor. Dunn, it's D-U-N-N. There is a book that she authored. You can find it on Amazon. And there's some various writings about her. I was recently trying to see if anyone had just written a biography on her, and I wasn't turning up anything. Yes?
Do you own some of his work personally?
I do. Yes, I do. I actually, when I was about, I don't know, 17, I was up in northern Arizona going through an antique store, and that's when I saw a painting by him. It's a little piece, and that's what started me down the path of who is this artist. It's just something really sparked and intrigued me, and that's when I sought out Paul Dyke, and thankfully so, because he passed away, some years ago, but I was fortunate enough to visit with him and get some incredible insight. Yes.
Was his wife a Blackfoot, and was he really involved with the tribe in later years?
His first wife was. You don't really find too much information about her, but his second wife was not. They did meet in Montana when he was a rancher and a wrangler up on those ranches, and there's stories about that as well, where he was out sketching constantly, while he was working the cattle, but his second wife was not. She actually, it's very sad, a few years after his passing, she committed suicide, and Paul, shared with me some of that, and the sad fact that she just couldn't really go on without him. Yes?
What was his favorite medium?
It was bronze. It was bronze. He's, of course, more prolific, and you find more of his paintings, but he didn't produce many bronzes because it was so costly, and, the 30s was the height of his production. There's not many. And then the 40s with the war, I think kind of put an end to that, with World War II. Any other questions? Yes?
Where's the Butterfly Lodge located?
Oh yes, the Butterfly Lodge is in Greer, G-R-E-E-R, Greer, Arizona. So it's northeast in the mountains. It's wonderful in the summer. Yeah, it is beautiful. And the lodge is wonderful. They've just made it a fabulous little museum there, and they have some of his wife's clothing that she, did beadwork on, and there's insets into the fireplace of, I think they're in bronze, of some buffaloes that he had cast, and they've really tried to retain the flavor of it. And when I was up there last, it's been a while, but they also had a lot of the newspaper clippings that Paul Dyke had amassed throughout the years, and he had let them copy those, so you could go in one of the rooms and just flip through, and read all these fabulous clippings of his days, in Philadelphia, New York, LA, and the write-ups, which are really telling too about the history and the perceptions of indigenous people, from a public perspective. It's very interesting. Yes?
I saw the boarding school thing, but with the European father, why was he in boarding school? Because most kids were forced in those situations.
Well, he was on the reservation, and that's where he grew up. So they made him go to the boarding school, and that's not uncommon at all. And his dad was gone for long periods of time. So his mother was the one who really took care of the homestead. And I think according to Paul, there was a little bit of animosity there, because Lone Wolf grew up kind of feeling, this is one part of the story, like his father had almost abandoned them, and he would be gone for really long periods of time, taking these people, these very famous people, Owen Wister and Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell, out on these major hunting trips and stuff. So another thing that Paul shared with me that Lone Wolf was not happy about was his father had a hand in, bringing alcohol to the reservations, which of course was terrible for the native people. Yes.
A lot of those contacts that his father made, though, helped him later in his career.
They absolutely did, yeah. But also Jack Kinney of Tucson, Loscher Ranch, he was hugely instrumental, I think even beyond any of the others. Yes?
Aside from what you said, the preservation of Montana, is he well known among American Indians?
He is not. He's another artist that's grown into obscurity. I borrowed some of the paintings from a tribal museum in Montana that was so generous to loan them, and they were just thrilled that we were having this exhibition, you know, and I was doing something on him because, you know, he's a very important part of the Blackfeet culture. And that story, you know, has really yet to be told on a large scale. So again, I hope someday to do a book. That's one of my goals, and bring in a lot more commentary from the tribe on his paintings, you know, to really look at his life and analyze these works with tribal assistance.
Was that the museum in Browning?
I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I borrowed those. I'd have to check on that. It's just, there's been so much I can't remember at the moment. It might be. Any other questions? Well, thank you so very much. Thank you.